Ever look at what's happening in the world and just get the feeling that you're not seeing the full picture? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down a pretty provocative model of global power. It comes straight from a Substack post by researcher Peter Duke called The Duke Report. So here's our game plan. We're going to climb this 5-layer pyramid of control, starting right at the bottom with the general public. Then we'll move up through the true believers, the behind-the-scenes operators, and all the way to the very top, the elite who are supposedly hiding in plain sight.
All right, first up, the whole idea of a world of pyramids. The central argument in the report is actually pretty simple. It says that just about every society, no matter what it calls itself, is built like a pyramid. You've got the huge majority of people at the bottom and a tiny group at the top calling all the shots.
And here it is. This is the very pyramid we're going to be dissecting. It's our roadmap for this whole explainer. Let's quickly go over the 5 levels. Starting from the ground floor, you've got the prisoners of the cave, the true believers, the assets, the handlers, and then right at the tippy top, the Power Elite Oligarchy.
So you're probably asking, how is a pyramid like this held together? According to the report, the main tool is something called epistemological warfare. Now that sounds intense, but it's not a war with guns and tanks. It's a war for your mind. It's all about managing perception, using language, culture, and finance to control what people accept as real.
Okay, let's start where most people live, at the very base of the pyramid. To describe this level, the source reaches way back to a classic idea from philosophy, Plato's allegory of the cave.
So, for anyone who needs a quick refresher, the allegory is about these prisoners who've been chained up their entire lives, just staring at a wall. Behind them, there's a fire, and things pass in front of it, casting shadows on the wall. For these prisoners, those shadows are reality. It's the only world they've ever known.
And this is where the source brings that ancient idea right into the 21st century. On the left, you see a classic drawing of the cave, but look at the image on the right. In this modern take, the shadows on the cave wall have been replaced. What are they now? They're the flickering lights of our phones, our tablets, our TVs, the screens that are constantly feeding us our version of the world.
Now here's the kicker. What happens when one of those prisoners actually breaks free and sees the real world? Well, when they go back into the cave to tell everyone the truth, they're laughed at, they're called crazy. The source argues this is a powerful form of social control, and even suggests that a term like conspiracy theorist was popularized for exactly this reason, to marginalize anyone who dares to question the shadows on the wall.
Let's climb one level up the pyramid. Here, we meet the people who are politically active and engaged. This is the group the source calls the true believers, a term borrowed from the philosopher Eric Hoffer.
So, a true believer isn't just your average voter. We're talking about someone whose entire identity is wrapped up in a cause. They're often fueled by deep personal frustration, and they have an unshakable faith that their movement holds the answers to all their problems.
The Duke Report points to examples from across the political map, like Black Lives Matter and MAGA activists. According to this model, the specific ideology isn't really the point. What matters is the dynamic. These movements are experts at taking individual frustration and channeling it into a massive, powerful collective force. They become the engine of the cause.
And the psychology here is really key. The report uses this quote from Hoffer to dig into the motivation. To the frustrated, freedom from responsibility is more attractive than freedom from restraint. Think about that. It suggests that for a lot of people, joining a movement isn't about gaining freedom. It's about escaping the burden of personal responsibility by getting simple answers and a clear enemy.
Okay, moving higher up, we get into the shadowy middle management of the pyramid. These are the operators who guide the true believers from behind the curtain. Let's talk about the assets and the handlers.
First, you have the assets, and that's a term that comes right out of the world of intelligence. An asset could be anybody, a journalist, an activist, a banker. They're out there doing things that serve the agenda of the elite. And here's the crucial part. They often have no idea they're just a piece on a much larger chessboard.
In the jobs these assets do, it's a huge range. The report lists things like honey traps, which is sexual blackmail, leaking insider information, or just being the person set up to take the fall, the patsy. It could also be journalists pushing a particular narrative, or even entire companies being used as financial fronts.
So one step above the assets, you find the handlers. Now, unlike the assets, these people are in on it. They know exactly who they're working for. Their job is to manage the assets and, critically, to be the public figures who soak up all the attention and criticism, keeping you from looking any higher up the pyramid. They're the ones you see cycling through that revolving door between big corporations and government.
For a concrete example, the source points to an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR.
This chart here is pretty eye-opening. It shows how many key positions in the U.S. government were filled by CFR members for over 70 years. The report claims that groups like this are handler networks that are really guiding policy no matter which party is officially in charge.
And that brings us to the final ascent. We're at the very peak of the pyramid. So who does this model say is at the top of it all, hiding out in the open? The Power Elite Oligarchs.
The report claims this isn't some new group. It describes them as an ancient family-based power structure. And their real power in the modern world, it argues, comes from their mastery of legal structures. They use corporations, banks, and private foundations as immortal vehicles to carry out plans that can span generations.
This picture is incredible, right? That's Walter Rothschild taking a ride on a giant tortoise. The source uses this as a perfect symbol for the elite's strategy. It's not about being fast and flashy. It's about being slow, steady, patient, and deliberate, playing the long game to steer society exactly where they want it to go over many lifetimes.
So how far back does this network go? The report references researchers who trace its roots back through the British and Dutch empires to the banking oligarchs of Venice, and even all the way back to the Byzantine Empire. This last diagram lays out how the source claims the system works today. It's called the Global Public-Private Partnership, and it's a top-down flow. At the top, private policymakers, like the World Economic Forum, come up with the agenda. Then, global policy distributors, like the UN, pass it along. National governments become the policy enforcers. The media acts as policy propagandists to sell it all to us, the policy subjects. It's basically a model where huge global policies are decided outside of any democratic process and just handed down to be implemented.
So, we've gone from the very bottom of the pyramid all the way to the top, walking through the Duke Report's model of global power. It's a complicated and, for many, a controversial framework, but it's designed to try and make sense of a world that can often seem totally chaotic. And regardless of whether you agree with this model or not, it leaves us with one final crucial thought. So, I'll leave you with this. When current events don't make sense, are you going to jump to a conclusion or start asking questions?